I think you should be able to see the screen. Is that right? Yes, good. Okay, so for the recording then, I'm Phil Stirling, and for 25 years I worked at the county council as their ecologist, and for the last 4 of those years I was put in charge of maintaining the road verges across the county. What I want to do this evening for Heaven in a Wildflower is talk to you about what I learnt during that long tenure at the county council and have put into practice that have changed the way that we look after road verges, hopefully forever in Dorset, because I think you'll like the result. So here we are. Here is a picture of the Weymouth Relief Road in spring. We haven't got too long to wait, probably another 6 weeks, and this will be the view that you see just up from Chapel Lane on the Weymouth Relief Road. It's wonderful. The first sign of spring, not just 1 or 2 cowslips, but a blaze of cowslips on the road. And we can do this. And this is part of the story about why I think we should be inspired by, in some respects, how easy it is to recreate some of the wildlife we've lost, and how somehow we haven't yet managed to take all of the opportunities available to us. So, why do we need to do better? Well, most of our gardens and amenity grasslands, I think, are poor in wildflowers. I bet you if you've got a lawn, you've probably got some daisies and dandelions and maybe a bit of self-heal in the lawn. But overall, it's not full of wildflowers, is it? And most of our amenity grasses, if you went out to Lodmore Country Park or somewhere like that, it's not full of wildflowers, it's mown grass. So I look at all urban grasslands, not just road verges, as that resource that we can use to better effect to help bring back wildlife and also help us to limit effects on climate change, because every time we mow the grass, we use fuel, and that fuel puts more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And you may think, well, I don't mow very much, but if you think about all the mowing that goes on, that's an awful lot of carbon dioxide going up for something that I believe we should be doing less. Wildflowers, of course, wildflowers and insects bring joy into our lives. They're lovely. It's wonderful when we go out and see them. And there are a whole range of public health benefits, and there's a couple of references in there that you'll be able to look up when you look at the recording for those public health benefits. But increasingly we are finding that, and it's more than mental health, there are physical and mental benefits of being submersed within a biodiverse environment that we're starting to learn about. But at the moment, we're locked into what I call regular cyclical maintenance. If you think about how often the local authority perhaps used to come around and mow the grass verges, or maybe trim the cemeteries, it just seems that, as soon as any flowers are up, within days, somehow the strimmers are out and the mowers are out and everything gets knocked down to the ground again. And we just go on and on and on, year in, year out. And of course, we all know that fuel cost is increasing and our carbon footprint never decreases. We just seem to keep doing the same thing year in, year out. And so as an ecologist, I look at the situation and think, are there smarter solutions to cutting grass that we can kind of build in more wildlife? We can do that at a cheaper price, which is more carbon friendly, and yet still leave those grasslands looking reasonably tidy. So there's a lawn on the left and Lodmore Country Park on the right. And it's fine when you're mowing a lawn. If that's what you want, that's absolutely fine. You can make a beautiful, neat job. But in local government, there isn't the money anymore to mow the grass that as frequently as we ever were. And so we end up with a situation where when the grass does get cut, it leaves rows and rows of clods of brown, grubby, rotting grass on the surface. And nobody's proud of that. The people who do the mowing don't want to leave it like that, but there is no money to be able to cut more often, which would mean the grass was shorter when it had to be cut. So we end up with these clods of grass which smother the wildflowers that are in there, and in any case, that system, all it's doing is creating more grass to grow, and we need to change that. And the way we change that is by thinking about what makes the grass grow in the first place. And soil fertility is the one thing we can control. If you think of when it rains or the sun is out or it's warm, that's when things start to grow. So we're about to come into spring and we get more light, more heat, and we've had some rain. But the thing that makes the grass really grow is how fertile the soil is. So this is the bottom end of Link Road near Hampshire Road traffic lights. And if you look at the slide on the picture on the left, is 100 meters from the picture on the right. And my engineering colleagues, when I was working with them, put the standard thick layer of topsoil onto the verge they were creating when that road was built. On the left, and on the right they'd run out and couldn't really be bothered to go and get some more, so they just spread out what they've got and sowed the same amenity grass mix on the top. The end result is stark. This is taken on the same day, this picture in April. And on the left, you can see the grass has grown long. That needs to be mown for safety, to make sure that cars and pedestrians can see each other. The visibility is really important. On the right, that grass doesn't need mowing at all. And that's because hardly any topsoil was put on it. And so the grass doesn't grow very long. It still looks green, it still looks tidy, but it doesn't need the maintenance. And look also at the number of wildflowers. Two dandelions and a daisy on the left, hundreds of daisies on the right, dandelions and celandines, and if you look carefully, a whole load of other wildflowers. No one put them there, they were already in the seed bank in the soil. So as fertility reduces, the wildflowers increase, and it's as simple as that. And that's how our naturally important grasslands across the whole of Northern Europe function, is that when the soil fertility is at its lowest, the biodiversity, the wildflowers, are at their most prolific and the most diverse. So in our urban systems, in our amenity grassland systems and our road verges, we've either got to create our grasslands using low nitrogen soils, or we have to manage our existing grasslands to reduce and not increase the amount of nitrogen. So there's two systems to use, and I'll just describe those two systems. The first is construction, and that's where we have the opportunity to use what I would say is ultra low fertility soils in creating them. And then we've got our existing grasslands where we're looking to reduce as quickly as possible, but reduce the amount of nitrogen that's existing in the soil. So basically, my tenet is that we shouldn't spend any more than we absolutely have to on cutting amenity grass. This is it, it's a bit of a luxury that we do it anyway, to be honest. But the reality is we've got very important things to spend money on in local government, and cutting amenity grass is probably one of those where we should only spend what we absolutely have to. So if we can get the grass to grow on low nitrogen soils, it doesn't grow as tall. And if we can control that grass that grows in the first place, we've got less to cut. Less to cut means that the mowing should cost us less fuel, less carbon, and we can all spend more time on other jobs. So lower cost maintenance and higher wildlife value on amenity grasslands should align. Now, but does it work in practice? And the answer to that is yes, otherwise you wouldn't be listening. So let's look at the Weymouth Relief Road that was constructed back in 2009 to 2011, just prior to the London Olympics. And I was part of the project management team there, constructing that road. The chief project engineer was Mike Reed, and I see Dawn, you're here. Nice to see you, Dawn. And Mike was very keen on a number of things, but he was also very keen to let me loose on this whole landscape because he trusted me to try and get this one right. And that is normally a verge like this, or this slopes, would have had a thick layer of topsoil put on them, sown with grass, and that grass would have been mown forever. I said the maximum amount of soil that we can put on there is a crumb, 15 millimeters. I don't know, half the thickness of the thumbnail on your hand. That was it. And in some places, no topsoil at all, just the bare rock that was beneath there, or the bare sands or the clays. And then those sort of bare areas were sowed with all the wildflowers that you can see on the right hand side, and some of those you'll recognize, I suspect, a wild carrot and lady's bedstraw. But some of those in there are really important wildflowers. Kidney vetch is one of those, and horseshoe vetch is another, about 2/3 the way down the list. And particularly kidney vetch is important because it flowers, it germinates very, very quickly on bare ground. It's designed to do that in nature. And 18 months, 2 years after I sowed the slopes here with kidney vetch, that's the result. So amazingly quickly, you end up with an abundant wildflower, and it's a wildflower you don't see very often. You might see it on sand dunes, and you might see it on some of our grasslands, but you will almost never see it in this sort of abundance because we're not allowing it to thrive. And it's a really important plant. It's a widespread species from here to northern Scotland, but somehow we've just let it dwindle in our environment. It's really important for one particular reason, and that's one of our blue butterflies. This is the small blue butterfly, which is a rare and declining species in the country. Lots of populations have disappeared from the Midlands into central southern England. We're okay for them in Dorset. We've got a few lovely coastal locations where kidney vetch grows, and the butterfly is thriving. But there's nowhere anywhere near like the abundance of the plant as there is now on the Weymouth Relief Road. This butterfly is now super abundant on the road verges because of the abundance of the wildflower. So here for the small blue, it really has found its heaven in these wildflowers of kidney vetch, which is lovely. And this population now is a very significant one throughout the southwest of England, probably the largest that there is anywhere for 100, 200 miles around, I guess. The road verges also support a whole range of other wildflowers. This other yellow flower is horseshoe vetch, and horseshoe vetch is the food plant for the caterpillars of the top two butterflies on the right, for the chalk-hill blue and the Adonis blue. The Adonis blue, second down, is a really stunning, beautiful, beautiful butterfly that flies in end of May and June, and again in August on those road verges. Back in about 1990, heading up towards the millennium, there were just 100 populations of this butterfly left in the country, and a very, very few new populations are arising, but nobody created anything on this scale. And so we now genuinely have a very large population of the Adonis blue present on this road verge, simply as a result of the creation of the habitat ready for it. And Carol and I hand sowed the seed that you're now seeing in flower in this picture. It's remarkably easy to do once you've created the right bare habitat for these plants. Once they get going, they're amazing. And the other two blue butterflies, brown argus and common blue, just below. So there are 5 species of blue butterfly now breeding on the Weymouth Relief Road. So here's the Weymouth Relief Road looking, well, 2020, it's still looking exactly the same. Stunning array of pyramidal orchids. I think we think of pyramidal orchids as a lovely orchid to see. It's a classic road verge orchid. I think we often see it on road verges, but we almost never see it in this sort of abundance. And it's wonderful. And almost every year, it's either bee orchids or pyramidal orchids that are coming up in super abundance on the verges now. And at the last count, we found just over 140 species of wildflower on the verges and 30 species of butterfly. And for those of you who know your butterflies, that's half the breeding species of butterfly that are present in Britain have now been found on the Weymouth Relief Road. And this habitat is 10, 11 years old. And I think it should give us great heart that we really can put back quite a lot of at least the commoner elements of wildlife that we've lost by redesigning properly our landscapes using what I call these ultra low fertility soils. And come back to that middle shot there, and you're looking at the orchids. That verge has had no management at all, ever. The last person to stand on that road verge was me when I sowed the seed on there back in 2010. That's it. That verge is self-maintaining effectively. Nothing ever needs to be done to it, or certainly nothing's been done to it in 10 or 11 years. My guess is, other than maybe the odd buddleia bush that we might need to clip out, almost nothing will need to be done for the next 10 years. So there is a wonderful site for wildlife that's actually costing you and I, paying our council tax to the local authorities, costing nothing to look after. And that is the sort of landscape that I think we would all cherish and wish to create. It's stunning. However, so that's what we can do when we design things. But we've also got an awful lot of existing road verges and public parks, open spaces which just get regularly mown like this. And I just see this as a crying shame, as a loss of opportunity. I mean, here we've got a relatively new mower that's gone in there, and it's called mulching the grass. So it cuts the grass really, really fine, and that means the grass sits very heavily on top of the existing sward. And what happens to that grass is it all rots down and returns the nutrients that have been put into the blades of grass as it's growing. It returns them to the soil as they rot down. And what does that mean? It grows more grass the following year. So we've got an ecosystem here where we are charging that ecosystem and keeping it going year in, year out. Add to that the nitrogen that's dissolved in rainfall and the vehicle emissions that are coming out there. Effectively, we're making our road verges in particular slightly more fertile every year. So just at a time where I'm saying we need to reduce fertility, to reduce the amount of grass mowing, what happens is we're increasing the fertility, which increases the pressure for more mowing, and yet we don't have the money to do it, and there's no benefit to it. So we've got to change that system. So what we can do, and you will see it in places, people will say, well, the local authorities should just stop mowing. Okay, what happens when you stop mowing? Well, on the left is a picture from Burgess Park in London of a just stop mowing trial, and the grass and the thistles and various common but okay wildflowers, wild carrot and yarrow, they all grow to about 4 foot high. You present that to the local authority people who manage the land, and they go, well, I haven't got a mower to cope with that now. That is such thick vegetation is that it cannot be looked after with any sort of degree of neatness and tidiness. It's a mess, and the rangers that look after that park don't know what to do with it. So just stopping mowing when you haven't altered the fertility of the soil beneath the grass isn't good enough. All you will end up with is a lot of very tall vegetation. The other thing people love, and I think we all love it, we love to see, don't we, around Dorset, when we look at arable fields, swathes of poppies coming up. And if you remember back to the London Olympics, there were wonderful wildflower shows outside in the Olympic Park. But interestingly, those wildflowers that you're looking at on the right-hand picture, Californian poppy is one of those, and cosmos, and all of these things which are definitely not native wildflowers. They look spectacular, and it lifts our hearts, doesn't it? But they're not wildflowers in the sense that our wildlife recognizes them as wildflowers. And that means they're less effective at being able to provide the resources for our native wildlife. And just as an illustration of that, this is a stark illustration. Let's look at common poppy on the right and common bird's foot trefoil, one of our lovely trefoils, on the left. Common bird's foot trefoil is a native perennial wildflower, and we see it lots on lots of places. And common poppy, interestingly, we think of common poppy as a British species. It isn't. It's been introduced from the Mediterranean many hundreds of years ago, but it has not brought with it the native wildlife that lived on poppies down in the Mediterranean. So if we look at butterflies and moths that are present in Britain, there are no species at all that are associated with poppy. And if you look at bird's foot trefoil, there are 45 species that are associated with common bird's foot trefoil. And the trefoil is providing nectar and pollen and food plants and shelter all at the same time for our native wildlife, whereas poppy doesn't provide anything for butterflies and moths, but it does provide a huge amount of pollen for bumblebees and other bees. And so bumblebees love it, and we kind of equate seeing lots of bumblebees with being good for wildlife. It kind of is, but it isn't anywhere near as good as having lots of native perennial wildflowers. So it's just a kind of a lesson to learn, if you like. We love to see the poppies, but they're not quite as good at supporting our wildlife as our native perennial species like trefoils. So changing that grassland mowing system is what I managed to do as an ecologist in charge of our mowing teams. And we've moved the mowing regimes from cut and drop mowing, which is cutting and leaving the cuttings where you've cut them, to cut and collect. It's what you do if you take one of your kind of mowers in the garden and collect up the cuttings from the lawn. But we're doing this on a bit more of an industrial scale, at least on the verges. And the particular thing that we do is that we let the grass grow really long, because that's drawing up the nutrients from the soil and putting them into the blades of grass and into the flowers and the seeds. And that means those nutrients are then ready for us to cut and collect, to remove, which means that they can no longer rot and go back into the soil below. And instantly you do that, you reduce the fertility of the soil beneath. There are some other hidden benefits here, is that when I started with the mowing teams, we used to have teams of 3 people that went out to mow the grass. One on the mower, one to trim around the street furniture and the signs and all the rest of it and look out for any dangers, and another person on the blower, just constantly blowing cut grass from the footways and from the roadway near the drains back onto the verge where it rots down and produces more grass. That third person is no longer needed because you've collected all the grass and it no longer needs to be blown. The tricky bit is that these mowers are much, much more expensive. So in order to prove the business case for the change, we did need to show how much we were going to reduce the amount of mowing that ever had to be done. So here's Littlemore Road, which will be familiar to many of you. When 5-6 years ago, that road verge was cut 5 or 6 times a year, probably 5 times a year in reality. In 2017, the team went out there and gave it 3 very good haircuts and took away those arisings in April, June, and July and September. This is the photograph of that verge the following mid-May. And remember, we would normally mow in April because the grass was way too long. And even after 1 year of harsh cut and collecting, the grasses have hardly grown. So there's no safety issue whatsoever. And look at the numbers of daisies and dandelions that are in there. Instantly, you reduce that fertility. You allow the wildflowers to come out and flower. So even within 1 year of this changing system, we're seeing more wildflowers and we're seeing a lower need for maintenance. And here's Mercery Road, just up from Sainsbury's, just near the railway bridge. And you can see after 4 years of cut and collect, what was a grassy verge is now full of wildflowers. And if you go and walk up that cycleway now, you will see lots and lots of rosettes of the wildflowers that are going to come up this spring and summer. And on the left is Link Road, up towards the industrial estate. And on the right, down towards the police station, a very grotty bit of verge, to be honest. I mean, it's nothing to shout about, but look what came up last year. It was a bee orchid, just came up on this rubbishy bit of verge down by the stadium roundabout, or Wessex roundabout, isn't it? So that's it's remarkable that just in these relatively modest changes from a cut and drop system to a cut and collect means that the grass never grows so high. The wildflowers, as you can see from these pictures, are just everywhere. Nothing particularly special, but lovely to start seeing bee orchids appearing on all sorts of verges around Weymouth. And all that's going to happen now is that site will become commoner and commoner. As we keep reducing the fertility of the verges, they will look ever more full of wildflowers. Now, people worry about tidiness, and cut and collect can deal with that too. So here's Astor Property down at Westhaven, and Astor Property Lawn outside the social housing. And there they were cutting 8 or 9 times a year, now on 5 cut and collects a year. But over the summer, it doesn't need cutting because the grass isn't growing, and because they've removed some of the nutrients. And in between those cuts, which are about 6 weeks apart in the summer, the flowers have got a chance to get going. And it's wonderful to see trefoils and all the hawkweeds and self-heels and clovers coming up, and the bees are enjoying it, and the common blue butterflies are in there. So we can look after wildflower lawns under cut and collect systems, which allow us to look after the wildlife as well as keeping things neat and tidy. And here's another view of Littlemore Road. So this is just down from the shopping centre, where those broad areas of grass that were gang mown 4 or 5 times a year. At the end of the first year of cut and collect, we sowed some wildflower seed, very common species, oxeye daisies and birdsfoot trefoils and knapweeds. And 18 months later, these areas have now become mini nature reserves. But in order to show that they're being looked after properly, the teams go around and mow the edge to give it a neat look to the edge of the make it look tidy. Meanwhile, in the middle, the wildflowers and all the pollinators are getting going doing their stuff. And that was gang mown grassland for several years after its construction, and now it's mini nature reserve. Easy to do, and a fundamental change in the way we're looking after our grasslands. Now, what do we do with all the stuff that we've cut? Just briefly, we hide it on the road verges where it's sensible to do so. So under hedges, in treed areas, under new tree and shrub planting, wherever that grass can be used as a mulch to help those trees and shrubs and hedgerows grow. And that is the principle of what happens to it. Every now and again you may see some cut grass heaps, but do remember that as the fertility reduces, there's less and less and less grass to cut each year. And so in the end, you'll barely notice those heaps at all. And in fact, the grass road verges, even in the urban areas, may only need a couple of mows a year. And just on that, we started our trials in North Dorset and around Blandford in 2018. And even in that year, you may remember in 2018, it was a very dry summer, very exceptionally dry summer. And the grass only needed cutting twice in any case. But since then, on the cut and collect system, what was once a system that was on 5, 6 or 7 cuts a year, even in that first year, we'd reduced on cut and collect to twice a year. And ever since then, it's either been 2 or 3 times a year for cut and collect. And that is the system that is now being rolled out across all the urban road verges across rural Dorset, so outside of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And it's a remarkable system that saves lots of money. And we can see just how much money it does save looking at the latest figures that Dorset Council have just sent to me. If we look at the 2 rows of figures, in the left hand you can see 2017 and 2021 as rows. The 2017 represents the system that we had in place before we started and switched from cut and drop to cut and collect, and 2021 is 4 years into the trials. And you can see that there you've moved from a 5 or 6 cuts a year to 2 cuts a year. The start and finish dates of the mowing, we don't start as early anymore. The team size, because we don't need somebody to blow the cuttings around, is reduced. And the end result of that is that staff are not required anywhere near as much to do mowing of grass. In fact, it's nearly 70% saving on staff resources through this new system. And that means that they can go out and look after the rights of way that need maintaining over the summer, or lead guided walks, or do more interesting things, or do plantings in towns. There's a whole range of different activities that the staff who were once upon a time constantly mowing grass in the summer, they've now got much more interesting lives, as well as the knowledge that they're helping to produce more wildflowers. And this comes to the budget. When I took over the service, I had just under £1 million to look after the road verges in Dorset. That's how much it costs, or was costing, to cut the road verges in Dorset. I left the council in 2017-18, and I managed to hand back quite a few £100,000 into the budget to say I no longer need it. And last year, the budget for cutting the same verges was just £500,000. So in a couple of years' time, I expect we'll see that the road verge budget will be under £500,000, and so will be 50% of what it was when I took on the service. So I think we have managed to prove pretty comprehensively that we really can put back wildflowers into our verges and save money at the same time. And I think that's something that I feel very proud of. And it's why I now work at Butterfly Conservation, to promote this approach to anybody and everybody who will listen. So that's my conclusions. Are fairly obvious that what we've got to do is to get our fertility of the soils down to increase the wildlife, to increase the biodiversity. When we do so, we can easily show just how much cheaper it is to look after our grasslands in our urban environments. And when we do that, we are certainly going to be contributing to carbon reduction targets, so helping to deal with our climate crisis through reducing the amount of fuel that we used in mowing. And of course, at the end of it, what are we doing this all for? Well, we're doing it for all sorts of reasons, but wow, isn't it just lovely to be able to go out and appreciate the wildflowers and the insects that are now all around us? We don't have to go and visit a nature reserve to go and get that treat. We can go up and down some of the roads that Mike Reed and I, when we constructed the Weymouth Relief Road, have helped to create for the local people around us. Great, thank you. Right, let me stop my share.
Thank you, Phil. That was just fascinating and cheering. Yes.
Well, I think it is, isn't it? It's rare that we get a good news story.